an interesting
Shall we give another couple of minutes before we start, or do we give the audience another couple of minutes to?
We have more than 40 people listening already. I think we can begin now.
No, we can go on. I'm ready anytime.
Yeah. I'm going to disappear for the lecture, but I'm going to be helping from outside.
Okay. All right. Hi, everyone. Hi, IEO family and people who are interested in this. My name is Behzad Hashimov, and I'm a member of jury of the International Economics Olympiad. And today our guest is Andrei Bremzen. Andrei is a professor of economics at New Economics School. Andrei teaches microeconomics and micro theory in general. His PhD is from Massachusetts Institute of Technology, where he studied microeconomics, economic theory, contract theory, and auction theory, if I understand it correctly. Andrei is going to talk about economics and how we have to think about microeconomics and theory in this world. The structure is the following. So Andrei will speak about 30 to 40 minutes. I'm not going to interrupt him. After he is done with speaking, I will ask a few questions, and then I will take questions from the audience. And I have the list of questions right before me, so that I will try to combine a few questions and ask Andrei, because there are a few repetitions. So with that, Andrei Bremzen, welcome, and take it away.
Thank you, Behzad. Thank you, everyone, for coming. I'm indeed Andrei Bremzen. I'm indeed an economic theorist. And I should start with the usual disclaimer. Being an economic theorist, I'm almost always jealous to my colleagues who do empirical work. In the following sense, people who do empirics can easily win attention from the audience by showing slides with graphs, Excel tables or whatever, figures, pictures, and stuff. Economic theorist is another guy, someone like me. I will not be showing any slides, but I still believe there is some value in what I'm about to say. Partly because theory is what generalizes knowledge to some extent. And in this talk, I will be developing 3 points, all 3 points related to coronavirus and its impact on economics and economic thought in particular. The first point will be pretty general. I'll talk about how economic crisis developed in the past and how this one is going to be new. Again, it will be sort of more of a philosophy than pictures and figures. And next I'll move to my favorite stuff, which is microeconomics. And I'll again stop on I'll be making 2 points. One, pretty general, about incentives and trade-offs, and one about complexity of rules and organizational design at some point. But don't be scared away by that. I'll try to keep it basic enough for everyone to understand, so I don't presume any preliminary knowledge of economics. So from the general point, I had a chance to look at the questions that you guys sent in before our meeting, and many of them have to do with the future. People ask, what will happen afterwards? When will the economy recover? What particular fields, what industry will prosper, what will not? When will the original growth rate, global growth rate, be sustained again? And the answer to that is both pretty straightforward and also very meaningful, I guess. The answer is the following. About every question about the future, pretty much. The answer is this: I don't know, and it is good that I don't know. And I'll try to develop this point. After all, what is economic crisis? So if you think about economic crises that we had over the last century or so, starting with, say, Great Depression. Okay, so the Great Depression was the biggest economic crisis in the 20th century, and it is still not surpassed by any, including the breakup of the Soviet Union. It was the closest point, I guess, in peaceful times at least, and it was nothing close to the Great Depression. Will Corona hit in terms of its disastrous impact that of Great Depression? I don't think so, but it is likely to be the second most serious crisis in that 100 years. Okay, now think about what other crises we had since the Great Depression. Well, I can think of a number of things other than the war. They would have been something like stagflation, which is in the late 60s and early 70s, when with both high inflation and high unemployment, something unprecedented. We then had oil price shock in the mid 70s. Again, that's a supply shock, very much unprecedented before. We then had, let's say, in the US, they had what is called savings and loan crisis of late 80s. Again, that was something new. Next thing come dot-com bubble. Okay, and next thing is probably, September 11 is one thing, but then subprime mortgage crisis and ensuing crisis, global crisis. The point I'm trying to make is that all these crises are different in nature. Okay, so every new crisis is inherently different from the one we had before. And that is good. In what way is it good? It's good in the way that had it been otherwise, had we have this same crisis again, that means that we haven't learned our lessons from the first time, okay? It's like going to high school. Every new grade, you have new stuff to learn. If you have to learn the same stuff you were learning last year, it's a bad sign for you, okay? You're not a good student. You have to relearn stuff. By the same token, Corona crisis, economic crisis, I'm now saying, talking about, is something totally new. What is new about it is that our policymakers all over the world are deliberately pulling the handbrake, basically, right? So they are trying to deliberately slow down their economies by isolating people, by shutting down specific industries, specific workplaces. Okay, deliberately by their own hands. And that is something new. That has never happened before. And because of that, we don't really know how the economy will recover from this particular crisis. Okay, because we never dealt with the situation before. Some people predict that it's going to be pretty easy, pretty straightforward to get the economy running again, because all we have to do is to stop, pushing the brake pedal, right? So once you pull your foot out of it, the economy will start accelerating again. But we don't know yet, for one thing. The other thing is that we don't know when it's going to happen. And that's not for us economists to say, right? So the reason we don't know it is because we still depend on bio research on that. Even to this day, we have very little idea about how the virus itself will evolve in the future. There are all sorts of questions that are still unanswered by our friends from the biology side. And I know what I'm saying because my wife is a computational biologist, and her entire lab is now, they basically stored away all the projects that they had, and now we're working full speed on the virus itself, on research on virus, how it develops and what do we know about it. Do we have a vaccine? Not yet. Are we going to have it next month? We don't know. How about treatment? We don't even know whether antibodies stay for long enough for you not to be infected again if you were once, okay? So with that little knowledge, there is little we can do in terms of predicting how the virus will be spreading in the months to come. And given that, we don't know what types of quarantine measures are likely to be taken by the governments. And because of that, we have very little idea about what economy will look like, global economy outlook will be seen in months to come or a couple of years to come. I must say that 3 months ago or so, I was much more pessimistic about that than I am now. 3 months ago, I was publicly advising Moscow city government to shut down, subway system, because I was thinking that the virus would be spreading much faster than it actually did. Okay, so if they shut it down at the time, that would be the first time since 1941, because Moscow subway system was operating continuously ever since. Okay, and even in 1941, when Nazi troops dangerously close to the city, it was only closed for a few days in a row. So even during the war, it was operating okay. These days, now I think that I was too pessimistic at the time, but there is still very little that we know about it. And I'm in the contrast, consider what is called, Greek debt crisis. Some 10 years ago, the country of Greece was so seriously indebted that there was this big European crisis. That is something bad. And what is bad about it is that it could have been avoided with more solid, fiscal policy. If you spend much more than you earn, it doesn't take, you don't have to be Sherlock Holmes to figure out that you're going to be broke very soon. Okay? And that's what happened to Greece. So there was nothing new. A crisis which is not new is bad in that it means that people didn't learn their, in macroeconomics, they call it no Ponzi game condition or something like that. I mean, if you start ignoring that, be sure you'll be in that crisis at some point. When it comes to the pandemic, we really don't know. As you know, the last pandemic of similar size, even bigger size, would be Spanish flu 100+ years ago. But its economic effects are so much confounded with that of the First World War that it's very difficult to identify exactly what was the effect. And since economic institutions all over the globe have evolved significantly since, the experience of 1918, 1919 may not be that much relevant today anyway. Okay, so my general answer to what will happen next is that I don't know, and I stress it once again, it's good that I don't know. Because if I did it, it would have meant that we're doing too little to learn our lessons from the past. I like to, it's not, I didn't invent it. The credit doesn't go to me, to someone, it goes to someone else. I like to, when I talk to people who are not economists, sometimes they say things such as, look, you guys are entire profession of economists. You go teach, you are professors, you are faculty, you publish papers, you print books and whatever. How come we still have economic crisis? Every now and then a new crisis hits. How come? What do we pay? Why do we as a society pay you for being an economist? After all, if you cannot even do that. And a good analogy that I heard from someone, and I'm going to suggest to you now, is that with medicine. Like if you're a doctor and someone comes to you and says, look, please tell me what I will be suffering from 10 years down the road. I'm good and healthy now. Tell me what I will die from. And what will the doctor say? Well, I don't know. Come to me when you have some symptoms. I can tell you that if you keep smoking 5 packs of cigarettes a day, then you're likely to develop lung cancer at some point. I'll never tell you when, and I will not even be 100% sure that you will die from that. Okay, that's the same applies for economists. Economists are good in analyzing past crises. So once you come with certain symptoms, then they will hopefully consensually provide you a drug for that, a treatment for that. But they have no idea what will suffer from next. Think about yourselves. Who would half a year ago imagine that the whole world economy will be at a halt, pretty much situation, right? So who would have imagined that the second quarter of 2020 would be so disastrous for the world economy as recently as 6 months ago? I don't think many would. But yes, every single new crisis poses new questions to economists. And remember, if we are on the research frontier, that by definition it means that we don't know what's going to happen next. Okay, so if you know your terrain, that means that you're not on the frontier. And the frontier researchers are now mobilized, such as biologists are. So many biologists, many virusologists, epidemiologists are all mobilized to think about the virus. And so are many economists to think about economic consequences of the virus. That would be for my general remarks for economics as a discipline. Now, why don't I move to more comfortable waters for me, which are microeconomics. If you open any single textbooks on any good textbook on macroeconomics, or in fact, principles of economics, any first textbooks in economics that you are likely to encounter in your life, you'll probably see something like general principles of economics. In one book, there will be 7. In another book, there will be 10. I'll stop on 2 of them, which I find the most important for the situation. Those that teach us a lot about how to think about coronavirus. My favorite one, so the 2 are the following. Number 1, people face trade-offs. We have to give up something to get something else. Number 2, people respond to incentives. If you manipulate incentives to people, people will react accordingly. People are smart. It sounds very general and very understandable by anyone until you start to apply it to your everyday life. Up until last year, my colleague Andrei and I, who are teaching our principles class for the freshman students at our program at the New Economics School, joined with the High School of Economics in Moscow, we were asking students to formulate, one single trade-off that they came across recently. By trade-off, I mean a situation where we have to give up something to get something else. I'm almost afraid to ask this question this coming fall because I expect every single response to be related to the coronavirus situation. In fact, one of the popular bloggers here in Russia, who is not an economist, once tweeted something like, I wonder what is going to kill more people, the virus or the quarantine measures to prevent its spread. And a good joke by our graduate, Misha Galashny, who is now a PhD student at the University of California in Los Angeles, his joke is, if the quarantine measures are optimal, that will be roughly the same. Okay, so we will save pretty much, well, you have to specify it's on the margin, but basically the idea is, wow, I somehow learned that quarantine can kill people too. And there are many ways how it can do that, right? So by, for example, when people are locked down in their apartments, if these are small apartments, then the level of, hatred between family members increases, the level of homicide increases, the level of suicide may increase, people lose jobs, people are more depressed, all sorts of things. There are many ways how quarantine measures can take lives. But there is nothing new for an economist. It's normal. If it didn't, we were not optimizing things before, right? So if it only took us the virus to think about quarantine at all, that means that quarantine is costly otherwise, right? Some of the people who asked questions before the questions that I had a chance to have a look at, wonder if we should save lives or economy, okay? So whether we should sacrifice lives by relaxing quarantine measures in order to boost the economy or the other way. I don't like to think about that way. Rather, I don't want the idea that we have to choose between lives and economy. After all, why do we need economy at all? Why do we want to live in a rich country as opposed to a poor country? To the best of my knowledge, no poor country in the world doesn't want to be rich. Okay, so every single poor country wants to be rich. I have not heard of anyone that says, okay, we have low GDP per capita, we don't really care. Okay, so why do people care about, say, GDP per capita or any other measure of economic well-being? Not because the figures themselves, the dollar amounts themselves are, deity to be worshipped. Not at all. That's not why we care about. It's because, being rich is associated with many other good things about your life. People tend to live longer. People tend to live better lives in many ways. People tend to have better, medical treatment, life satisfaction, everything like that, if there is more stuff in the economy, right? So if your GDP per capita is higher, you're likely to be to have more meaningful lives, put it that way. Okay, so after all, having a better economy actually means having more quality lives. Okay, So when we say, do we want to kill people by not having enough quarantine, but keep the economy, I prefer to think about it the other way, or in a different way, which is, do we want to save people by slowing down the economy as opposed to save people by not slowing down the economy? And there is this trade-off that each nation faces. Now, you may ask whether we're choosing the optimal point. And the answer as of now, C.1, is we don't know, partly because we don't know enough about the virus itself. Right? So I actually expect the entire economics profession to change dramatically after the pandemic, in that there will be so much research activity directed towards studying its effect. It's pretty much like the Great Depression. So few economic historians of the last century stayed away from discussing the Great Depression, its causes and its effects. Okay, it was the major economic event in the 20th century. By the same token, I expect pandemic, which we're experiencing now, to be the main event for the next few decades to come, maybe in the 21st century at all. But we're just too early in the process to come up with meaningful recommendations. So we still have to, so every single country has to come up with a policy on that. But these are pretty much common sense policies, okay? So we just don't have enough data. And the variance of our descriptions of the reality, I should put it that way, is just too high. Almost surely, later on, people will be studying decisions, economic decisions made by policymakers all over the world in the year 2020, and pointing out the mistake here and there, and there is this mistake in the US, there is this mistake in Brazil, there is this mistake in Russia. But as of now, it's just too difficult to figure out exactly what these mistakes are. So we still have to trust. I'm sorry I couldn't be more specific, but that's because we are in the middle of the storm. It's very difficult to, so when we have a benefit of hindsight, we'll of course have much more to say on that. But by the same token, by the way, if you ever study history of Great Depression and you come up, or any other economic crisis of the past, and you come up with a certain idea that, you know, why haven't they done this and this and this and that? Well, remember this, that when you were in the middle of a crisis such as the pandemic, you didn't know much about what to do, not much more than what they had back in the time. On incentives, again, the rest of my talk will be just examples, illustrating points from economic theory that I want to make. So on incentives, the city of Moscow decided to figure out how many patients actually have antibodies. And the way they did it is they created allegedly random samples of individuals whom they invited to the public health facility, Poliklinika, to take free tests, which will figure out A, whether you have the virus itself, B, whether you have antibodies. And what they also mentioned is that if you are found to have the virus, you'll be quarantined in your place for 2 weeks. What's worse, you'll be mandated to download a specific app to your cell phone, which will call you up at random points of time during day and night, and you'll be mandated to send a selfie to a specific web server to make sure you're at home. Okay? And it's not a joke. So an elderly lady got one of those messages at 4 a.m. and she was fined for not sending her selfie, to the server within 20 minutes or so, I don't know. On incentives, so whoever designed this clever scheme to randomly sample people in order to figure out the spread of virus in the population never knew about incentives, okay? What kind of incentive do I have to actually show up at the public health facility to be tested? Well, for all I know, I don't want to go to a public health center in Moscow at this time anyway. I don't want to see many other people. Some of them may be sick. Okay, I don't want to be there. But that's not the whole story. Those who are more educated, those who know more about, viruses in general, are less likely to show up. Which also means that the sample that they're going to get is by no means representative of the entire population, right? So you're likely to be having people who are less educated on average. And what we know about people who are less educated on average is that they are more likely to be employed in manual labor. And what we know about people who are employed in manual labor as opposed to, as a university professor, I enjoy my lectures in Zoom. I don't have to go out of my apartment ever. And I don't accept to walk in remote places. I'll come back to that. And of course, the people who have to go out are usually people who are more likely to contract the virus. Okay, so if you are less educated, you're more likely to show up at the health facility to be tested, but you're also more likely to have to go in and out all the time and have to use public transportation to get to the place of work. Okay, so that destroys the very incentive effect, destroys the representability of the sample. And it seems like our health, whoever is in charge of this smart scheme to have random testing in Moscow, totally ignored the idea that the sample will be dramatically biased, meaning that its result will not be representative in any sense. So again, that's a very simple idea about incentives will help you design, or at least avoid designing a bad scheme, hopefully to help you design a bad scheme. My last point that I wanted to make is on complexity. So the previous one was pretty much basic microeconomic theory. It appears on page 1 of every microeconomic textbook. People face incentives, people face trade-offs, people respond to incentives, okay? So when I go to page 2, or maybe page 202, or maybe volume 2, the textbook in microeconomics will likely start talking about more complex issues. And there are 2 issues that I have in mind here. One is organization design. Okay, so this is a complicated matter. We don't know how to design a universal efficient organization. In fact, every large organization that is efficient is likely to be both case studied in a business school, but also unique in some sense. What is not so, City of Moscow is a complicated structure. And apparently the complexity is not fully recognized by whoever was in charge of designing smart schemes. And one of those smart schemes was, again, a quarantine measure imposed by our Department of communication. I don't know what exactly it is called, but basically there are people who are in charge of all the high-tech stuff in the mayor's office. And they came up with this brilliant idea that whenever someone needs to go out during the lockdown, they'll have to go online to the city, server, fill out a form in Russian, by the way, which immediately poses a problem to anybody who doesn't speak Russian. And you'll be given a QR code, which you are supposed to download to your smartphone and produce every time you are stopped by a police patrol outside, so that as a proof that you have done that. Looks like a smart, high-tech idea. No chance to work in a city of 15 million. Okay, so in the city of 15 million, such as Moscow, there are many people who, A, don't have smartphones whatsoever, for 2 reasons. Some of them may be too poor to afford one. Some of them, like my father, who is 83, may just not be, advanced enough in terms of technology to understand what QR code is. Okay, but that gets worse. At some point, I actually remember the date, it was April 15, 2 months ago. They decided that you could only use public transportation, including metro, the subway system in Moscow, if you have this QR code. which you're supposed to produce and show to the policeman at the entrance to each station. On April 14, the day before, when I learned that they're going to do this, I immediately, it was a no-brainer to predict a disaster next day. And indeed, it happened in the morning. What happened, of course, is that the chief police officer in Moscow, he may be or she may be a smart person and understand what QR code is. But, you know, as you go down the hierarchy to the foot soldier level, you know, to the level of someone who actually has to check all those QR codes at the entrance to each metro station, you lose tractability. So at the very low level, you will find an officer who is not educated enough to figure out whether the QR code is valid or not. And indeed, that's what happened. It took them a while, took each of them a while to check whether a particular person presents the right QR code or not. And that procedure by itself generated huge lines, huge gatherings at the entrance to major metro stations in downtown of Moscow, which was precisely what they wanted to avoid in the first place. Okay, so there is this principle, KISS, which I learned was first invented in the US Navy. KISS stands for keep it simple, stupid. So you don't want too complex things to do. In fact, there's this trade-off, back to my previous point. There is trade-off between complexity and efficiency. If you want a very efficient scheme, it must be complex, and complexity by itself is a bad thing. When you want to apply a policy to a huge and very diverse city such as Moscow, 15 million, that does not, is not meant to say that in economic theory we do not have sophisticated schemes. In fact, we do. There is this whole field called mechanism design, where it's part of economic theory, where they design complicated mechanisms to solve specific problems. And they care about efficiency, optimality, incentive compatibility, all that kind of stuff. But these mechanisms could be very complex. That by itself is not bad. So the most manifested piece of that is probably the most developed part of mechanism design is the auction theory, which is what my PhD thesis was on, as Vigzot rightly mentioned. And if you want to read a complicated, complex design, go to fcc.gov, which is Federal Communication Commission website, which is the public office in the United States, which distributes frequencies for the use of cell phone companies, cell phone providers. That is a complicated design of auctions for simultaneous combinatorial auctions. I don't want to go into there, it's not my topic today, but there is nothing wrong about it because people who are going to participate in this complicated auction are not actual old lady Mary, your Aunt Mary. It is a big corporation which has an entire department devoted to optimizing participation in the auction. They employ economic theorists and so on. So complicated designs are sometimes needed, but not when you need when you want something universal to apply to a 15 million population of a huge city. That's just not gonna work. And that's what happened on April 15, but, and I'm going to, the last example of today would be this. They didn't learn the lesson. At the Moscow City office, they didn't learn the lesson that complexity is too bad. And when time came to gradually relax the lockdown restrictions, the first thing they wanted to allow people to do is to occasionally go for a walk nearby. They reopened public parks, which were originally closed. They started reopening that, but they again came up with the idea that we want to do it in a high-tech way. We don't want to let the park open to anyone, but what we'll do, they decided, is we will regulate who can have a walk at which day of the week. Okay, so they designed a scheme. I wonder how much it costed. They designed a scheme which was that's like a code. So again, you have to log into the Moscow City, Moscow Mayor's website. You want to type in your street address. It will return the days of the week that you're allowed to take a walk. Okay, so you type in your street address, like my street address, and it'll say, okay, so you can go on Monday, Wednesday, and Saturday or something like that. You type another street address and says, look, for you it's Tuesday, Thursday, and Sunday. Okay, again, that's a city of 15 million, some of which are inevitably not connected to the internet. And what's worse, once you're outside, what's the way to check what your street address was in the first place? Well, we have this passport stamp, which indicates, but not, again, not everyone lives according to their stamp in the passport, blah, blah, blah. So for instance, my wife and I live together in the same apartment, but that's the apartment that belongs to me, so I can work according to this schedule, and she can only work according to the schedule of her passport stamp, which is someone else. So the schedule, it's complicated. We cannot even go to the park together. Of course, that was ridiculed immediately. So one of the most prominent stand-up comedian in this country, Maxim Galkin, came up with the sketch to ridicule the Moscow mayor, who will be explaining to the president, this apartment building can go this day and that day, if it's not built until 1950, and then blah, blah, blah. But that's not my favorite joke. My favorite joke, and I'll end here, is that once they figured that you can enter pretty much every single street address, it will return your working days. So what Moscovites did is that they entered, my favorite joke, the street address of Lenin's tomb. Okay, so Lenin is still buried in the mausoleum on the Red Square, and that has a street address. And if you type in the mausoleum address, it will return you something like Monday, Wednesday, and whatever, Saturday. And Lenin is the only person who lives in the Lenin mausoleum. Wait, did I just say lives? Okay, let me replace it with resides, more neutral. So Lenin is the only guy who resides in the mausoleum. So apparently this Monday, Wednesday, Saturday implies that you are in and around Red Square at one of these days. You're likely to meet Lenin himself walking around. And the whole thing didn't last for more than a week. So they had to cancel it after a week because they realized that it was just too complex. It was not working. So keep it simple, stupid applies here as well. And that's another story, this time from the organizational theory. Don't be too complicated when you want to have it massively available to everyone, okay? So in conclusion, let me speculate on what I expect to change up the coronavirus. The first thing, I'm primarily an educator in economics, okay? So most of my time, I teach students and prepare materials, give public lectures sometimes. What I expect to change dramatically is the attention to, well, two things. First is the attention to how people study economics. So the focus on trade-offs, incentives, organizational design will increase after a few failures like this. And second, which is my pure speculation, but I would expect that because the whole thing is so much global in scale, my guess is that people in more developed countries will pay more attention to how things look in less developed countries, okay? So it doesn't help to eradicate virus in all countries in the world but one, because this last country will reproduce the virus immediately, okay? So it looks like the appreciation of importance of global economic coordination in many respects, including helping developing countries, is likely to go up. And that's my hope. So with that, I will conclude the first part, and then if we have more interesting questions, because I'll be happy to try.
Thank you, Andrei. Thank you, Andrei, for your presentation. I will try to ask a few questions on my own, and then go over the list that I have. And everyone, feel free to chat, send the questions through the chat. I think chat option is also available. So my first question is the last point that you made about the fact that maybe people, especially policymakers in developed world, will care about developing world more, because now we have this weakest link, right? So it's this kind of O-ring theory of development, meaning the minimum of all the countries is basically what we should care about. Like, and I agree with you that mathematically makes sense to care about the weakest link, because we know that once it spreads somewhere in the most even in the poorest countries, if this thing happens, we can't do anything to stop it in the developed world. But my prediction was that it makes developed world even more nationalistic and even close down even more, rather than like to open up and then try to help them. Like if you follow the European or American news, it feels like they're gonna stop the integration, not accelerate it. What do you think?
On the US, I think it's more a feature of the current administration. So it looks like the policy of President Trump is more isolationist than is traditional for the US governments for last few decades at least. But I don't think it's related to the virus itself. I think the policy has been around even before last year. So we all know about President Trump, that he's more
isolationist.
Isolationist, thank you, than we would expect from a U.S. leader. I don't see the same in Europe. So I think as of July 1st, Germany takes over as the presiding country in the European Union or something. And Chancellor Merkel just gave a lengthy interview to The Guardian, I guess, in which she stressed the importance of keeping the European Union and, if necessary, provide assistance to the weakest members, to those who are more vulnerable to the virus and its aftermath. So my understanding is that at least on the healthcare side of the development, countries are likely to cooperate more in the near future, precisely because the externality is too high. We all know the concept of externality, right? So there is something which is not captured by microtransactions. And of course, the spread of the virus is a very prominent example of an externality. Now that we know how dangerous it could be and how almost nearly impossible it is for any country to close down, right? So when at the initial outbreak, at least in Europe, so I remember, I think it was in early March or so, when we figured out that northern Italy was already in very bad condition while the rest of Europe was still kind of doing okay, there were attempts to close down the rest of the continent from the spread of the virus. The last time I was in Europe was, I think, on March 9th in Belgium. It was still okay to go. And they kind of wanted me they wanted to track me. They didn't want to track me when I was returning from Belgium, but if I were returning from France at the time, they would want me to lock down for quarantine for 14 days, which didn't make much sense given that the border between Belgium and France is almost non-existent anyway, right? But apparently they tracked all the flights back to Moscow from Paris, but not from Brussels. I have no idea why. Given that, there was zero hope that any country could, keep the virus out of its borders. And now that we understand that, we can project it into future pandemic cases. And because of that, I think the need for cooperation in the healthcare sphere, at least, is more widely appreciated now than it was before.
Thank you. So overall, do you think that this pandemic will move voters in developed world to the left in economic issues and to the right in immigration policy?
Say it again?
Do you think the results of this pandemic will move voters in developed world to the left in economic issues like government intervention in healthcare and economics, and to the right in immigration issues like more isolationist policies?
I don't think isolationist policies will work in terms of preventing the spread of the virus. So in some...
I meant the preferences, like I meant the preferences of the voters, sorry.
Yes, but rationally, you cannot really hope to isolate developed countries from the developing countries in terms of virus spread. So to my understanding, the right sentiment among voters on the immigration issues, so restricting immigration, is more about, preventing, keeping jobs, okay? And this is not a 0-1 situation, right? So there's not, few countries can hope to restrict immigration to 0, okay? So it's like something continuous. You somewhat restrict immigration, you save some jobs. Whereas with pandemic, it doesn't work that way. You have to isolate completely, 0 immigration, 0 travel, if you really want to keep the virus out of your country, but no country can realistically hope on that anyway. So I don't think there is going to be much change in voter sentiment on immigration. Whereas on the economic issues, yes, I believe that because every single major economic event always pushes opinion to either left or right on, it reminds you of market failure, which is basically when more government action is called upon, or it reminds you of a government failure, which kind of moves your opinion toward more free market oriented thing. So this shock is definitely on the former kind.
Okay. Now I move for the questions from the audience, and I think the question I really liked is like, if you are in charge of Moscow's policy, what would you do, given what you know?
I would do this simple test. So if I cannot express a policy on half a page in plain Russian, understandable to everyone, I will not pursue this policy. Okay. So my favorite story is about parks. I was given this opinion before. They closed all public parks in Moscow in the middle of the pandemic. I think it was in some early April. I might be mistaken, maybe late March, early April, I guess. And some people said, look, we don't really need this. So what's wrong about me walking alone in the park? Okay. And my answer is, there is nothing wrong about you walking alone in the park. But the policy cannot be just that. So the policy of, you're only allowed to walk in the park if you are alone or with the members of your own household, and only between, 5 a.m. and 9 a.m., which is what they came up with. I wonder why they came up with 5 a.m. as the starting point. Why not 4 a.m. or something like that? And then you have to give instructions to the police officers in parks to address situations of violations. And that is just too complicated. In that way, I support, in the very height of the crisis, I actually supported closing down all parks. So in the trade-off between simplicity and efficiency, I was on the side of the simplicity. Just close it down, full stop. When I was very pessimistic in March, by then we only had data from European countries. We only had data from Italy. By that point, I would be, as I mentioned, I would have advocated closing down public transportation system altogether. In fact, they closed metro system in Kiev, which is the capital of Ukraine, very large city. It was not very efficient, partly because people substituted for metro by small microbuses, which is even worse. So, but again, what you want to do is you want to make sure that complexity is always on the table. That was the message that I tried to convey. And then you have to figure out how much. I'm not an expert in Moscow city governance. For example, I have no idea how many births we have in terms of capacity of our hospitals, COVID-developed hospitals.
When do you think about labor? So there's a question that do you think that after pandemic, more jobs will be digitalized or replaced? I think that's the question, and how this will affect the professions such as teachers, surgeons, orchestra musicians, and those that are not very easily digitalized. Let's call it this way. Psychiatrists or masseurs, who do massage or stuff like that.
Nothing I can tell you that we don't know. So there are professions who are easier to digitalize. such as university professor is a fortunate guy or fortunate person who is either doing research or teaching or doing some administrative stuff, but all three of these are pretty easily digitalized. So I am a lucky guy. My lifestyle was not too much disturbed by the pandemic. Of course, it's not the same thing. So teaching in class, like physically, is not the same thing as teaching online, in that you have less of an eye contact, less understanding of how much the audience can absorb of what you're doing, and so on. But still, it's a pretty close substitute compared to many other jobs. Like if you're a construction worker, there is not much you can do in terms of, if you need construction done, then construction workers must be there. There's nothing to replace them with. So basically, the equilibrium will shift away from offline to online. That's a basic principle. I think it's called Le Chatelier principle. Whenever there's a push from one direction, then the equilibrium shifts towards to compensate for that. For teachers, that's another push to develop online teaching techniques. Again, these are not perfect substitutes for offline teaching, but I'm much surprised. So my son is in the 3rd grade. He's 10. He's 9.5. And it went surprisingly smoothly for him. I was actually thinking that a boy who is 9 needs a classroom to make sure the teacher watches him all the time, and the teacher manages the class, the order in class, all that kind of stuff, discipline and stuff. Apparently, it went much easier than I thought. He went to Zoom just as easily as I did. And during the class, he was very attentive, just as attentive as he was in a normal classroom. I would sometimes be passing by his room, and he was totally in class, participating and stuff. One thing that is worrisome on this is that the inequality is in danger. Actually, equality is in danger. So inequality is likely to be spreading, partly because how many computers you have in your household may be a function of your income. Okay, so for us it is easy. So there are 4 of us, my wife, my 2 kids, and I. Every one of us has a computer. That's fine. But I can easily imagine people who cannot afford that many computers, and then it's a problem. So one thing we should keep in mind is to make sure that is understanding that equal access to even primary education now depends on technology, and the availability of the technology may depend on income in ways that we want to avoid.
One question I always thought about is that, is there any priors that you had about the way people act or the way they behave that changed during the pandemic? Like, did you think that, for me, at least in the US, what happens is that the way that people behaved and are behaving right now during the pandemic, it feels like a group project. When one person does all the job and everybody free rides on them, like nobody is wearing masks, and it's a political issue and so on and so forth. The fact that everybody has to chip in so that this virus will go is really hard to understand, and I think that kind of public good problem that we thought is much more salient than I previously thought. Is there anything that changed your priors?
What we learn, I guess, as the pandemic develops and as we observe, cultural habits of people in different countries, is that there is a huge variation in there. Okay, so there are societies where trust level, support level is high, and then there are others where it's not so high. Consequently, there will be different styles of governance in this. So the different styles will be optimal. In some countries, masks are mandatory, and you'll be fined a considerable amount of money if you are found outside of your place not wearing a mask. It might be good for societies where voluntary participation is something which is not necessarily part of the everyday culture. So for these societies, I would advocate mandatory mask laws. In fact, I would say that Russia is one of those. Level of trust, I don't overestimate the level of trust in Russia. And we have mandatory mask wearing in all food stores and every stores. Do you have it in the US?
No, only food stores have it, and people are taking them to courts because it's like Costco, for example, has this policy, and people are really mad. There are a lot of videos on social media where people talk to the Costco security and shout at them and so on. So.
Yeah, so it looks like in the US, the tradition of suing authorities for something that you don't like is very strong. In Russia, suing authorities is not nearly as popular as in the US. So it looks like Russian authorities have this leeway in how they can apply mandatory mask wearing laws. I've not heard a single case when someone will try to sue, like Moscow City, for mandating wearing masks in public places. So for the society such as former command society, and it's not a big cost, right? So we're not taxing people. We're just saying, look, you have to wear a mask, full stop. And many people comply if you are persistent enough in enforcing it.
No, but the U.S. is very high trust society. It's one of the high trust societies out there, and also in terms of voluntary work, in terms of charity work. If you look at the data, you see that Americans spend a lot more money for charity per capita than any other country of its income, or they spend more time volunteering than a lot of other countries. So generally, the trust level of society should be high, and nevertheless, people are not wearing masks and going out to the beach and behaving very, very suboptimally. Although young people are going to the beach, but old people are dying. Just the fact that people are so weird in terms of other people's life was an eye-opening to me in one of the most I would say high trust societies. Was it surprising to you or no?
I can only speculate about the US. I'm not a big expert there. My guess would be that all the high charity level that you mentioned is more about club goods than about public goods. So I want to do charitable donation to particular causes that I like, not to the society as a whole. Whereas when we speak about wearing masks, that's about me being generous to some unspecified people. Okay, yes. So my understanding of how many people in the US make their charitable decisions, be that volunteering or be that charitable monetary contribution, is that they want to make sure that it goes directly to where they want it to go, as opposed to the society in general. And if that is the case, the contradiction goes away, right? So you can still be generous to people you want to target while not caring about people in general. So that's my theory, but I'm not sure. It's not supported by any evidence. It's just my theory.
No, I think it makes sense because the earlier point that you mentioned, that you really like your colleagues who do empirical work and you're a theorist, and it kind of really nicely maps to that idea that you mentioned, because the way we measure trust in the societies empirically is using those proxies, right? Like how much people do charity, how much people do volunteer. But in theory, what we mean, the construct is different. So we know what the high trust societies means. We know the definition in words. But then when we go out and do the empirical work that like a lot of economists do, we take whatever it is off the shelf. Oh, all right, let's just take high trust for voluntary work. And when you take that, this thing breaks down in examples like that, because there's a lot of hair to split in terms of thinking about what exactly this variable is to the construct that we are trying to measure. I think we are on time, exactly on time. There are questions about, do you think there will be more online activity? And I think
yes.
Yeah, and then the stimulus check sent out by Trump is a good way of combating the looming economic situation or recession or depression in general. I think the answer is probably yes. And I don't think it's the Trump administration, though. It's the Congress, but yeah.
There are many economists, many prominent economists, who push governments for unprecedented, fiscal stimulus now by sending away checks. I support this initiative. In fact, I believe that governments of developed countries should consider spending on the order of 10 to maybe 20% of the annual GDP in terms of direct payments to its citizens or to people who live there to keep them afloat until the guaranteed measures are stopped and the economy is allowed to start running again.
Okay. Thanks, Andrei, and thanks everyone who participated. I think we have to end, on time and make it a tradition. And I think I will yield the floor to Yulia or to Daniel, whoever is, to close down and
Yeah, it's me. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the lecture. And thank you very much, guys, for coming to the lecture. We will post the recording of the lecture on our YouTube channel. You can find it by searching International Economics Olympiad there. Please also keep up with the updates on our Instagram page and the Facebook page, because there are a lot more lectures to come. Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
So what do we do now?